All right, so I already hinted to the fact that today we're going to talk about the idea that all of our statements are going to be the converses of yesterday's statements, okay? So we just saw on number 17 from the homework, I wrote out, if parallel, then corresponding angles are congruent. What would the converse of that be?
Parallel.
Okay, but we gotta do the corresponding for the angles, okay? So, all we're gonna do is, we're gonna do the converse and we're gonna say, if corresponding angles congruent, then parallel, okay? And I'll allow you to abbreviate. Big hint for you as we go through. If you are trying to show that they're parallel, your conclusion is parallel. If you're trying to prove angles congruent, your conclusion should be the converse of this statement, and you would say that the angles are congruent. So you would say, if parallel, then corresponding angle is congruent. So your conclusion is always what you're trying to prove, okay? All right, so we had 4 statements yesterday dealing with the idea of alternate interior, alternate exterior, and consecutive interior. Can someone give me one of the converse statements from yesterday? Oh, good job. Okay. How about if alternate interior angles congruent, then parallel.
Is that supposed to be ALT?
Alternate, yes, ALT. Sorry, I like to abbreviate if we can.
No, it looked like an H, that's fine.
Okay. All right. What was one of the other ones that we learned yesterday? Okay, she's saying if alternate exterior angles congruent, then parallel. Hint, 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 the last one will not be congruent. No, it's not the word not congruent. Very good, okay. If consecutive interior angles supplementary, then parallel, okay? And these are the statements that you are going to use when we get to our 2-column proofs. I want it exactly like this, okay? Do not just say your reason as corresponding angles, because corresponding angles are not always congruent. Reminder, you had an example like this in the homework, okay? Whoops. An example, okay? If I gave you this line and this line cut by a transversal, are these 2 angles congruent to each other? No. Are they corresponding angles?
No.
Yes. They are corresponding angles, but they're not congruent because the lines are not parallel.
Oh, yes.
So that's why we study the idea of the if-then statements. You have to put it in that particular wording. If parallel, then the corresponding angles are congruent. If they're not parallel, then they're not congruent. All right, remember, think about the inverse, okay? All right, so let's, okay, go on to example number 1, okay? In the picture, the measure of angle 1 is 60 degrees. What must the measure of angle 5 be so that line B is parallel to line K? Everybody agree 60? So if this is 60, this is 60. Okay? And so that's using the idea that if corresponding angles are congruent, then the lines are parallel. Okay? That means those 2 numbers have to be the same. All right? And like I said, a lot of the stuff we're going to do today is very similar to what we did yesterday. So if angle 3 is 65 degrees and angle 7 is 3x plus 5. Find the value of x that will make these lines parallel. Ideas.
Set them equal to each other.
Okay, I heard set them equal to each other. 65 is equal to 3x plus 5. All right, I would like a reason. Why are you setting these two angles to equal to each other?
Because they're corresponding.
All right, and if corresponding angles are congruent, then the lines will be parallel. Very good. Okay, all right, solve. Tell me what you get. All right, you should eventually get x equal to 20. Subtract the 5, divide by the 3. Okay? Questions there? All right, you're given the following situations. You are supposed to determine, okay, are the lines parallel? So think about the 4 statements that we wrote at the beginning. So in example 3, the one on the left, okay, you got to think, are the 2 red angles there? Are they corresponding, alternate interior, alternate exterior, consecutive interior? Think about what they would be.
That if they're alternate exterior, then they're gonna be parallel.
Okay, so she's saying that since these alternate exterior angles are congruent to each other, that these 2 lines, A is parallel to B. You agree with that statement? That is correct. Okay? All right, over here. You have to decide, is A parallel to B based upon the information given? The red markings are saying that they are congruent. So you're saying yes? Give me a reason why.
Because the lines are parallel to each other.
Why are they parallel is the question.
Those are corresponding.
Because the corresponding angles are congruent. So now we can say that A is parallel to B. So remember, it all goes back to the first 4 statements. If corresponding angles are congruent, then A is parallel to B. If alternate exterior angles are congruent, then A is parallel to B. If alternate interior angles are congruent, then A is parallel to B. All right, that's the idea. So now I look at the third one down here. It says that angle 1 and angle 2 add up to be 180 degrees. What are angle 1 and angle 2 called? They are not consecutive. Alternate interior. What's supposed to happen with alternate interior? They're supposed to equal each other. Okay? So is that happening here? No. So can we assume that A is parallel to B? No. Okay? So not parallel. Or we cannot assume so. Okay? So it goes back to our first 4 statements. You got to keep that in mind. All right, so I'm going to add in another one. I'm going to just check for understanding here. Here's a line, here's another line cut by a transversal. If this angle is congruent to this angle, is line A parallel to line B? No? Why not?
Because they're vertical.
Vertical. Was vertical in one of our first 4 statements today? No. Vertical angles have nothing to do with parallel lines. Okay? So remember, we're only looking for corresponding alternate interior, alternate exterior, or consecutive. Yes?
I was gonna say one of them's interior, one of them's exterior.
Okay. Very good. Okay, and there's nothing that puts those 2 things together. They are congruent. The angles are congruent, but the lines are not parallel. Okay? So reminders on that. All right? Over here, example 4. Based upon the information given, determine which lines can be proven parallel. Now, your possible answers here, just to check for understanding, you are either going to say, based upon these angles being congruent, that either A is parallel to B, that's a possible answer, that C is parallel to D, that's a possible answer, or you're going to say not parallel. Okay? So always look for, are they corresponding, alternate interior, alternate exterior, so on and so forth, and then determine which lines are parallel. Go. All right, so the first one, angle 1 and angle 5. I'm going to mark angle 1 congruent to angle 5. So here's the thought process. Angle 1 is on what line and angle D, or 5 is on what line? They are both on C and D, and line A is its transversal line. Are 1 and 5 touching B at all?
No.
No. Now, the other part that you gotta be thinking are, 1 and 5 are what type of angles?
Corresponding.
Corresponding. And we said if angle 1 and angle 5 are corresponding angles and congruent, then the lines are parallel, and the lines that we're gonna say are parallel are C is parallel to D. That's the answer. That's what I'm looking for. Some of you are writing like corresponding, alternate interior. No. It's just, I want one of these three things as your answer. Okay? So, now I go on to the next one. Okay? I'm gonna look at angle 1 and angle 16. Okay? So, do they have a line, a single line in common? We talked about this yesterday. Are they both touching A? Are they both touching B? Are they both touching C? Are they both touching D? Do they have a line in common? No. So that means that there's no way to show that angle 1 is congruent to angle 16. They're not corresponding, alternate, they're nothing. So we're going to say not parallel. We cannot determine that the lines are parallel based upon these two angles. Okay? Does that help? Do you think you can do the last two now? All right, try the last two. Okay? Make sure that we understand for the next one, okay, that angle 2 touches these two lines, angle 14 touches these two lines. They have nothing in common, so again, not parallel. Okay, there's nothing that we can show that are parallel. But then for angle 3 and angle 10, which two lines are parallel? A is parallel to B, okay? C is their transversal line, and because alternate exterior angles, 3 and 10 are alternate exterior angles, that's why A is parallel to B, okay? So that one's a little tricky, okay? All right, we got two proofs that we're going to talk about, okay? And we are going to use properties that we have already learned, and then the 4 things that we did at the beginning of the lesson today. Okay? Those are the things that we got to keep in mind. All right, so our objective is to show that line M is parallel to line N. They give us stuff so that we can at least get going. Okay? That's our given. We said given always goes at the top. Okay? The next statement is we added 115 and 65 and we got 180. Okay, we used the addition property. Okay? Angle 1 and angle 2 is equal to 180. Can anybody tell me what property I am using? Because remember, reasons are always properties, theorems, or postulates, and substitution property is correct. Because we substituted 1 for the 15 and angle 2 for the 65, and then we came up with this new equation. Now, angle 1 and angle 2 are supplementary. We're going to write, and we got a cardstock coming that'll help you with this, definition of supplementary angles. What does it mean for two angles to be supplementary? Well, it means that they add up to be 180 degrees, okay? Now, 1 and 2 are what type of angles?
Alternate interior triangles.
I heard alternate interior,
Consecutive.
No, consecutive, sorry.
consecutive interior. What's true about consecutive interior angles? If the lines are parallel,
Are they congruent? No, yeah.
that they are what? That they're supplementary. But remember, we're trying to prove parallel, so that's going to be our conclusion. So we are going to say, if consecutive interior angles supplementary, then parallel. Okay? And it's just like the statement that we wrote at the beginning. All right? All right, example. Example 6. All right, with this, couple things that keep in mind. Okay, in the figure, they tell us that R is parallel to S, and angle 1 is congruent to angle 3. Okay, these are known as your given statements, and we're trying to prove this. That's always going to be last. Okay, couple of things to keep in mind is when they tell us things, let's mark it in the picture. So if R is parallel to S, I'm going to put an arrow to mark that. If angle 1 is congruent to angle 3, I am going to mark that with the tick marks. Okay, and then that's going to help us. Picture's worth 1,000 words. That might help us put things together. Okay? In general, when we are trying to prove lines parallel or angles congruent in this chapter, we are going to tend to use the transitive property quite a bit. So just kind of think about that. Okay? All right. We start by doing our givens. R parallel to S. Given. Okay? All right. Why would they tell us R is parallel to S? What conclusion can you draw from the picture based upon R being parallel to S?
They share, oh,
Any ideas? That 3 or 2 are congruent? Well, here's the only thing though. Angle 3 is on this line, 2 is on this line, and we're talking about this line and this line.
well, they share the,
So you're on the right track, you just chose the wrong angles. Go ahead. 1 and 2 are congruent. Angle 1 is congruent to angle 2. Okay? These two are congruent because R is parallel to S. Because what are angle 1 and angle 2 called?
Oh.
Corresponding angles. Now remember, we're stating congruent, so our conclusion is going to be congruent. Okay? So if parallel, then corresponding, and I'm going to abbreviate here because I'm going to run out of room, angles congruent. Okay? So a couple of things. If we say parallel, that's usually the hypothesis of our reason on the next line. If we are trying to prove congruent, your conclusion is congruent. All right, so just a couple of tips. All right, I'm going to do the next given. Angle 1 is congruent to angle 3. Given. All right? Look at these two statements. 2 and 3. What do you see? What could be the next possible statement? Laura. She says angle 2 is congruent to angle 3. Give me a reason. You are absolutely correct. Hint, hint, hint. Casey gave us the same reason 10 minutes ago. Transitive property. Since they are both congruent to angle 1, they're congruent to each other. Okay? All right, so now we've got it marked that 2 is congruent to 3. Do we have enough information to now say that P is parallel to Q? Yes. Why would P be parallel to Q? What type of angles are 2 and 3? Alternate interior angles. Well, if alternate interior angles are congruent, what do we know about the lines? Then they're parallel. And so remember, okay, if alternate interior angles congruent, then parallel. Notice the difference between line 3 and line 5. We were trying to prove parallel, so our conclusion was parallel. Okay?